Oh hey there, you probably clicked on this video because you're going to take your IB exam soon, and you're worried about it, or you're simply trying to maximize your score. Well, that was me 2 years ago. I sat for the IB exams in November 2022, and I managed to get 45 points with an A in TOK and an A in the extended essay, all without any form of tuition in middle school and high school. And I'm only making this video 2 years later, well, because I procrastinated. Hashtag IB core value. But I hope to give you all some tips and tricks that hopefully you guys can find helpful in your own IB journey. Now don't get me wrong, I definitely didn't do this all by myself. I was very privileged to come from a top JC in Singapore and had very good teachers, resources and parents who had given me a good education. Well, that being said, I believe there are many things that are actually in your control for you to be able to get your ideal IB score. And this video hopefully will go through my take on some of those things. Oh, and by the way, I'll be dropping the content and resources for this YouTube video down in the comments below, so you can refer to that while you're watching this video. I think the most important step is to figure out where your goalpost is and why you're doing it. So be realistic in your target, but also try to push yourself outside of the comfort zone. So maybe your reason for getting 45 would be to get into a competitive course in the university that you want to, that most often doesn't require a 45 point unless you're doing very ultra competitive courses like medicine, dentistry and law in Singapore, and even in those cases you don't really need to get a 45. A 44 and 43 would be similar. In fact, a 43 pointer with better extracurriculars would do much better than a 45 pointer in university applications. And if you look at entrance criteria for courses for the most competitive courses in the UK, let me just show an example. Entry requirements for Cambridge Economics: 41 to 42 points for IB, 776 at higher level. You just need a 776 at higher level. Now you might be doing it just to challenge yourself, or you're a perfectionist. In that case, go for it. You might also be doing it because you want to use this to prove your self-worth to others, or because everybody else around you is talking about it and you feel like that's a natural course of action without really knowing why on a deeper level. And I would say that is an unhealthy reason. You probably would want to rethink why you're aiming for 45 points or 44 points for that matter. Also, figure out your point of diminishing marginal returns, the effort on the x-axis and the IB score on the y-axis, and you find out that the gradient is actually increasing at the start, and then the gradient starts to plateau over here, and this is where you hit the point of diminishing marginal returns, and every extra ounce of effort that you put into studying will reap you much lesser rewards in terms of increasing your IB score than before. And maybe it would be wise to stop at somewhere around here, this point. Over here, really think about things like your opportunity cost, the mental health, the toll on your mental health, and also what better things you can be doing, like extracurriculars that can help you get into, I don't know, medicine or an overseas uni. Now, just a side note about tuition, because I mentioned earlier that I haven't taken any tuition in middle school and high school. What I have against tuition is that it seems to be the bare minimum. Like, everyone seems to be doing sending their kids to tuition, and if you don't do that, you're like falling behind your peers, and you have FOMO. And not gonna lie, I almost got chem tuition at one point in time because of that, even though deep down I knew I didn't really need to, because I find that a lot of resources that you get from tuition are already readily available either in school or online. But I feel like for some people, tuition would be extremely beneficial if you A, do not have access to enough resources in your school, or B, you struggle to stay independently motivated, and hence tuition would be someone to hold you accountable for, which is pretty important. Now, I want to give you the key framework that I used during my IB. I like to split it into 3 parts. A would be understanding the concept, B would be internalizing the concept, and C would be applying the concepts and understanding to the specific framework of the examination. So it's sort of like a chronological approach, but also not really. You'll understand why shortly. Now, without further ado, let's dive into part A, understanding the concepts. So you'll see a key theme reiterated here, and that key theme is to not be afraid to ask questions. So make full use of the resources provided at your school. So before the lesson, if you're someone who struggles with understanding concepts quickly during lesson itself, that used to be me in certain subjects. Trust me, I wasn't the fastest at understanding concepts. So what I'll do is to read through the textbook or notes provided by the school before the lesson itself. And if you don't know what lesson is going to come next, just ask your teachers, or you can also ask your seniors or your friends for extra resources on that particular topic before your teacher goes through it in class. So you might not be able to understand the topic fully before going to lessons, but doing some pre-reading at least helps you to catch up faster with your peers during the lesson itself. Now, talking about during the lesson itself, don't be afraid to ask your teachers questions. Now, you may think that your classmates are judging you, but trust me, a lot of them have the same questions. They are just too afraid to voice out. Now, you can also try to voice out and ask your teachers questions after the class itself if you think that question is sort of specific to you, or you can also book for consultation or office hours. I know some teachers allow you to do that. So for example, I used to have a lot of CCA commitments in school, and I would miss lessons because of them, and I would book consultation slots with my teachers in order for me to catch up with the content that they went through in class that day. And remember, you paid for school, so make the full use of the resources at your school. Another tip is to ask your friends. You always have that one person in class who just gets everything instantly. So ask them how they visualize, how they understand certain concepts, and learn from their way of thinking. And if after all this you are still lost, it is helpful to refer to online resources. So I remember days where I just come back, sit down, it's like, oh my god, I have no idea what was going on in class that day. So just sit down, open my MacBook, and I'll type in whatever concept or organic chemistry happened in school, YouTube it. Some channels I found useful were Khan Academy and Econ plus Dell for economics. Moving on to part B, which is internalizing the concept. So the difference between these two parts, part A is more for putting the content in your short-term memory, and part B, internalizing, will be putting the concepts and content into your long-term memory instead. And I always found it very frustrating how I understand concept, and then I go to sleep and I do whatever I did back in those days for like a few weeks, and then I wake up one day and I'm like, oh my god, I forgot about the concept totally. Like I have to relearn it. Don't you find it frustrating? So here, I'm going to teach you some ways to turn that short-term memory into your long-term memory. Now, the first step to internalizing concepts is to first sort the mass of information that you have. And I like to do this either through the use of mind maps or acronyms. For acronyms, one tip is to come up with quirky acronyms that only you can understand so that it becomes more memorable. So now we have sorted in information. The next step is to transfer this into your long-term memory. And how I like to do it is magic phrase active recall. I'm a huge fan of active recall, which means the learning technique that involves actively retrieving information from memory rather than passively reviewing it. Now I want to give you a useful visual analogy for sorting information and actively retrieving it. So imagine that information are pieces of jewelry that you have just bought. What you would do is first organize them in a jewelry box. And that basically mirrors the process of drawing a mind map, where you're telling your brain that transfer payments and minimum wages go into the section of government intervention, which is housed under the topic of economics of inequality. For example, you want to find a key, which is information about minimum wage. For the first few times, you might open the wrong box, but after a while, you realize that it is under the topic of economics of inequality, under the section of government intervention, and finally, voila, you find minimum wage. And if this is a jewelry that you use every single day, the more you go through the motion of opening this box and opening this section up, the easier it is going to get. And after a while, it just becomes pure muscle memory. You don't even have to actively think about retrieving the information. It just pops right up in your brain. And that is how active recall works. Another way you can practice active recall is to use flashcards. Anki is very helpful for that. And by far, my favorite way of practicing active recall is to teach. You don't really understand something unless you can actually teach it to someone else. So sometimes I like to randomly yap to my family members about some concept I learned in physics class or econs class, or teach your friends when they need help. And I even know friends who would teach themselves concepts, record themselves saying it loud when they're running, which is quite crazy to me, but yeah. So another helpful tip is to use spaced repetition together with your active recall. So spaced repetition basically means study sessions are more effective if they are spaced out. So you can start off by maybe memorizing this certain chapter, active recalling this certain chapter, not memorizing, once a week, and then you go into once a month, then you go into once every 3 months, something like that. And because once they're stored in your long-term memory, you're more unlikely to forget them, so you don't need to review them as much. So it might be quite a bit of work at the start when you just learn the concept, but after a while, you'll already be stuck in your long-term memory, and even if you try to forget it, you won't. Just kidding, I've forgotten most of my IB syllabus. Now part C will be applying it to the exam, and the keyword here is practice, practice, practice. Now I would like to touch on 3 sections when it comes to practicing. Number 1, timing. Number 2, content. Number 3, style. So for timing, when should you start practicing? Ideally, you would like to be familiarized with the format of the IB exams even before you start on part A and B, so that when you do part A and B, they can be more targeted to the demands of the exam. So you can do this by flipping through, just roughly looking through past IB papers, or you can even just look at the IBO's test rubrics. Now, one major mistake I see a lot of people making is that they start on part C too late. So they think that they really need to get 100% of the content stored in their long-term memory before they start doing practice papers. I think that's just not the case. You just don't have so much time during your IB years, your 2 years of IB, to perfect all your content before you start practicing. So ideally, for me, what I like to do is somewhere in the middle of part B, I like to start doing part C. And the thing about doing part C is that it is also a form of active recall, so it can help you reinforce part B as well. So that was why I said at the beginning of the video that part A, B, C need not be chronological. Now, on to the content of the practice that you're doing. This is more about quantity. So everyone has that part, the 10-year series, but 10-year series is not enough to me if you want to get 7s in all your subjects. You need to go beyond that. There's online archives of IB exam papers going back beyond 10 years. There's also mock papers from other IB schools that you can do. Now, on to style, essentially how you should be practicing. So for me, I like to find my flow being the state where I can just focus on the paper for a really long period of time, maybe 1 hour, 1 hour 30 minutes, simulating the actual conditions of the exam. I also hope that it helps me to learn to focus better, so that when I'm actually doing the exam, I can be much more intensely focused on the paper. If you're struggling to stay focused, one helpful tip might be to switch your study location. So if you're studying at home all the time, maybe go to a cafe. If you study in a cafe all the time, maybe go to a school. If you study in school all the time, maybe try doing it at home. And always switch it up time to time to make studying more fun and interesting. Also, remember to review your papers. I think reviewing the paper is as important as doing them. Find out where you went wrong, and repeat parts A and B with the concepts that you went wrong. And also, I find it really helpful for you to track your progress. I used to do it using an Excel sheet. I think seeing the numbers on your Excel sheet go up is actually a very important way of motivating yourself, because you find that every paper that I'm doing, I'm getting better at it, which makes me more motivated to do more papers and then get better at it, which becomes a positive feedback loop that helps you stay more motivated when you learn. Now, a bonus tip is to always stick to the intent of practicing, which is to find out what you're weak at and to improve it, rather than to keep maxing out your marks, because that's not the most important thing. When you do a paper and you know that this question has come up before and you're confident in doing it, just skip the question. Or if you're semi-confident in a question, but it takes way too long to write it down in full, just verbalize it to yourself and check against the answer sheet. This makes the whole practicing process much more efficient. And this is especially helpful when you only have a few days or few weeks to the exams. Now, if you're still watching at this point, congrats, you're 20% of the way to a 45-pointer. The reason why I say you're only 20% of the way there is because the other 80% of your effort comes from getting the extra 3 points in your EE-TOK, as well as getting a 7 in your Langlit. Because most people struggle with getting that last mark from a 6 to 7 or from a 5 to 7 in the Langlit. So my tip to you would be to get started on EE and TOK early. For EE, choose a subject that you love and you want to do research in. For TOK, look at samples and exhibitions and know clearly the rubrics, what they want out of you. And for both EE and TOK, get people to read it to you and give you their comments. For me, I found it helpful. For my TOK, I sent it to this guy on Fiverr called Get an A in TOK. And for languages, English, Langlit, for example, I think one mistake that a lot of people make are to think that Langlit is just something that you either get or you don't get, and there's basically no way to, improve your score in Langlit. That is simply not the case. Langlit is just like any other subject to me. I think with adequate understanding and with adequate practice, you can master the skill to get an 17 or 18 or 19 for your Langlit essay. Now, my last and final tip to you would be to fight for your marks. I originally got a 44 point for IB. I got a 6 for my Langlit because of my IO. I went to remark my paper and my IO increased by 2 marks, and that was how I eventually got 45 points. So I encourage all of you, if your mark is not too far away from the upper grade boundary, go for a remark, fight for that 1 mark, because that 1 mark might be the difference between getting a uni offer and not getting a uni offer. Now, if you'd like me to make more videos like this, like applying this framework to specific subjects like physics or econs, or to interview other 45 pointers or A-level 90 rank pointers, comment in the comment section down below and I will do it. I promise you. Shut up. Now remember, IB is not the end of the world. You have a whole life ahead of you. IB is just a small speck in your spectrum of life. And finally, more than getting a high score in IB, I hope you enjoy the process of learning as much as I do. I should probably take the camera out, it's gonna freeze.